Hey guys, it's Green Zephyr. Today I'm going to be reading some extremely outdated books about sharks and talking about them. So, first one we have here, Mystery Monsters of the Deep. And so I'm going to be reading. We have chapter 4, The Great White Shark. Has it a big brother? So basically, this chapter talks about how people have been finding extremely large great white sharks in the 1800s and the 1900s, and they have they found multiple 36-foot great white sharks, one 37-foot one, and they've because of that they hypothesized it could have been a megalodon. But what I find interesting, this book was written in 1981, and apparently back then they didn't know too much about megalodons. The megalodon was discovered in 1835 and first described then. However, apparently people didn't know much about them. They just found these huge shark teeth and they assumed that they were modern day great white teeth, just much bigger. So that's the interesting thing. Back then they just thought that it was a really huge great white. Some of them didn't even realize they were fossilized. They found some that looked like they were recent teeth from a shark that just barely died. But anyway, so let's get right into here. Okay. The great white shark, an Australian man-eater, also known as the White Death, has been seen in so many places around the world that it may be a migrant. This fish is fearsome enough, but there's a possibility that it might have a big brother, a still greater white shark dating from prehistoric times that, like the prehistoric fish, the coelacanth, still roams the seas. Okay. So then it says that we have very slim evidence. Of course, that was back then. This is an old book, like I said. Very slim evidence of a shark bigger than the great white. However, in this time period, the average size of a great white was believed to be from 30 to 40 feet long, whereas the largest great white shark we have alive today is 21 feet long. So that is nowhere near the sizes that people used to think they grew to. And the average size of great white's only around 17 feet or smaller. For an adult, anyway. Okay, so it says, we have a great deal of information on the great white shark of today, enough to make it clear just what a dangerous monster of the deep it is. During the 1800s, the great white became a little less mysterious to us. An ichthyologist called Gunther, in his catalogue of fishes in the British Museum, told of two great whites, each 36.5 feet long, from Port Fairy, Victoria, Australia. The sharks had been dissected, he said, and the jaws taken to London. It was by using the teeth and jaws that the length of the monsters was estimated. So then, like I said before, they were estimating here, the great white shark grows up to 37 or 40 feet long. That was the reports that were published. So back then they assumed that just, the average size was around 35 feet. Well, and then some reports said they used the term 40 feet or more to describe the length. But yeah, we have no proof of a great white ever getting 40 feet long. And then there was one of these pages here. They had a boat that was 36 feet long, and they tied a shark that they caught to the boat, and it was the same length as the boat, so they had a 36-foot great white. And let's see. In June 1978, again off Montauk, a group of men were out looking for blue sharks. John Sweatman, the captain of the 36-foot-long fishing boat, ebb tide, and the others on board thought they saw and harpooned a great white shark 36 feet long, weighing between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds. They were able to estimate the length because the shark looked to them as long as the ebb tide. The great fish dragged the boat 14 hours before snapping the line and getting away. If it really was a 36-foot great white, it would bear out the figures from Port Fairy, Australia. And let's see. So, one night in 1979, part-time charter boat skipper Tommy Cashman was with his 4-man crew and his 33-foot-long charter boat, Rogue II. They were on the Atlantic off Sinner Morich's Long Island. The men had heard there was a floating carcass of a 60-foot-long sperm whale in the vicinity. When the great white can get it, sperm whale is a favorite food. So they found the carcass and piloted the boat up to it. And they found 7 or 8 great whites circling it, which is the largest concentration on record, of course, at this time period. So, they harpooned the shark, and then it took them 9 hours before they were able to capture it and pull it in. And so they got that one. And then it says, for more than 100 years, the possibility that there might be a big brother to the great white shark has troubled sailors and fishermen. In the 1870s, the British Navy corvette Challenger dreaded up from the Pacific Ocean bottom shark teeth 5 inches long. These, say British writers J.R. Norman and F.C. Fraser, in giant fishes, whales, and dolphins, must have belonged to a shark nearly 100 feet long. That's the other thing. Back then, they assumed megalodons got anywhere from 100 to 120 feet. They said a small one was 80 feet. We know now that at the maximum size, it would have been around 60 to 65 feet long. The average is more in the 40 range. Then it says, no one has ever seen a shark that size unless someone has but took it for a sea serpent or a whale instead. This could happen. In fact, it did happen. When the largest known shark, the white-spotted whale shark, was first seen, it was mistaken for a whale. That was on Captain James Cook's second exploring voyage to the Pacific, 1772 to 1773. When he was south of Australia, between Australia and the Antarctic, Cook's naturalist George Forster saw what he called a whale, 36 feet long, with an oblong, blunt head, small eyes, and a pair of large fins behind the head. The creature was covered with white spots, he said. Thus, Forster, plus others of Cook's crew, may have been the first Europeans to see the biggest fish in the sea, the whale shark. Far larger than the great white, the whale shark may reach a length of 45 or 50 feet, even, say some authorities, 60 or 70 feet. Okay. So then, we have... Well, in the Guinness Book of World Records, it doesn't say what year. Oh, wait, no, 1978. Okay. It said that the biggest whale shark ever found was 60 feet 9 inches long, and that was the basis of the belief that the whale shark could reach up to 70 feet long. These people always overestimated these things. As soon as they saw one like 60 feet, they're like, oh, it can get 70. They found a tooth from a megalodon, they're like, oh, it can get 100. They were doing that all the time, like especially with the great whites. They found a 36-foot great white, and they assumed that they could reach 40 or more just because they found a pretty big one and it wasn't fully grown. They apparently did a lot of assuming like that back then. Then it goes on to talk about the basking shark, the world's second largest shark. And the longest one caught was 45 feet long in 1961. And it says the third largest shark is the great white. In one of the other books I have it shows a little chart of shark sizes, and it puts the great white in there as 36 feet long and the Greenland shark as 24, I think. And the accurate measurements, Greenland shark would be around 24, but the great white's only around 20 or less. So therefore the Greenland shark is bigger than the great white, but it's still not as heavy. Then it talks about more fossilized shark teeth found that were even larger than the ones on the Challenger. So those ones were 6 inches long or larger. Some were 6.25 inches. They say those came from a 60-foot long creature, which that would be more accurate than the 5-inch ones and 4-inch ones that they thought came from a 100-foot megalodon. And this book refers to it as Carcharodon megalodon, which at the time was accurate. Now it's Carcharocles megalodon. And there's also other species of megalodon too, not just the that kind. And they all have different sizes, but they're pretty much similar. Let's see. Then an old photograph of the jaws shows 6 men inside, 4 of them standing erect with 3 or 4 feet of space above their heads, the others kneeling in front. So yeah, if you've ever seen one of those in person, a set of megalodon jaws, megalodons were really big. Working with teeth 25 million years old, found in Florida's St. Johns River, Dr. C.J. Jeremiah of Jacksonville depicted a young Carcharodon megalodon 30 feet long that would eventually grow into an adult 45 feet long. Now that would, if that was the maximum estimate, then that would be a male, because female sharks are bigger than males. So a 45 foot would be a male and a 60 foot would be a female. And then it says, Planet Ocean's estimate of 30 feet for a young Carcharodon megalodon, 45 feet for an adult, makes you wonder. It's certainly close to the 36.5 foot length of the Port Fairy, Australia specimens in the 1800s. It's also close to the length of the great white shark that John Sweatman of the Ebb Tide and his party saw off Montauk, Long Island in 1978. But we now know that megalodons aren't alive anymore. However, those would have been extremely large great whites, and I think that's cool to think about. So then here we have a photo. Hope that's in focus. We got some megalodon set of jaws with a kid in there. And yet says, the caption says that set of jaws is only a half-grown megalodon. So that wasn't even full size. Could the Port Fairy and Montauk creatures have been giant Carcharodons still alive today? There's no real evidence to support this view, yet it is just such a possibility that keeps people on the lookout for unknown monsters of the deep. The great prehistoric sharks Carcharodon megalodon and Carcharodon aureliatus, I can't pronounce that, aureliatus, may or may not have been ancestors of today's great white. Sea Secrets for May to June 1977 says we have no reason to think they were directly related. Philip Miles says the modern great white appears to be the lineal descendant of this ancient pair. Take your choice. The great white, mako, tiger, and other sharks are themselves ancient animals. Panorama, the magazine from South Africa, says they shared the earth with dinosaurs 163 million years ago. They have lived in the oceans all this time pretty much as we find them today. Sharks, says McLean's Fishing Encyclopedia, are a very old group of fishes. 400 million years old is one estimate. One reason that sharks have stayed around so long is that they are smart, much smarter than we once thought. Shark researcher Eugene Clark found that they have learning curves as impressive as rats. To obtain food, they can change their behavior. Let's see. Anything else here? The last ice age ended around 11,000 years ago. Could the giant shark have been alive that recently? If so, could it still be alive today? Probably not. But for us to find a giant live Carcharodon would hardly be more surprising than it was for the Navy to accidentally catch the unknown shark with a glowing mouth called megamouth. And it talks about that in chapter 2. Then it also goes on to mention that the coelacanth was prehistoric, and they rediscovered it as well, still alive. And actually, recently, people have been catching some of those in Africa using nets. They just use deep sea nets and pull them up. So that's probably it from this book. Then next, I have this book from 1982 called The Great White Shark by Eve Bunting. Now this one is a hilarious book. It is so out of date. Somehow there is hardly anything known about. Like, this is 1 year later. Like, wow. But yeah, this is 1 year later than the other book, but they somehow know even less about sharks. Like, I don't know what was going on here. Anyway, so then chapter 1 talks about the megalodon. Lived in the ocean about 15 million years ago. Its name means rough tooth / huge tooth. So, yeah. Okay. In 1918, fisherman Port Stevens, Australia, which it talked about in the other book that I just read, saw a strange sight. It was an immense shark. The creature came up and lifted their lobster pots. It swallowed the pots and the mooring lines too. And these were big, heavy pots. Each one held close to 40 large lobsters. The shark was like something from a nightmare. One man said it was 300 feet long, which we obviously know is false. Another said it was as long as the dock they stood on. Its head was large as the roof of the dock shed. And they thought it was either a megalodon or a giant great white shark. Okay, and then we have a comparison of teeth. We have a fossil of a megalodon tooth, and then we have a present day shark tooth. Okay. And here's the photo they were talking about in the other book. The set of jaws with the 6 men. Just 2 in the front kneeling and the others in the back standing up within the jaws. So, okay, let's see. We go to chapter... Okay, so chapter 3 talks about the shark attacks of 1916, which I'm going to go way more in depth in the 3rd book. So I'm not going to talk about it here other than it was a time period of 10 days. 4 men were killed and 1 was severely injured, but he lived. So, talks about... Okay, let's see. Yeah, the other book talks about it way more in detail. Where is it? Okay. It was this one, I think. Okay, chapter 4. The ones that got away. Not too many people meet a great white shark underwater. Some do, and they live to talk about it. Now, the other thing I want to say is, great white sharks, well, they are dangerous. They do kill people, but I wouldn't be afraid to swim with one in open water, not even in a shark cage. Because the thing about sharks is a great white shark isn't going to attack you for no reason. If you're in open water, kind of deep, just by yourself with a shark, it has no reason to attack you. It wouldn't want to attack you. The thing is, well, they're famous for the fact that if a great white shark tastes human, it spits it out and never will attack a human on purpose again. But there's always accidents. Almost all shark attacks are accidents. There's the ones where people are splashing around, and splashing mimics, well, any splashing or vibrations they attract sharks because it reminds the shark of a struggling fish. So that's what they think it is, a fish that's either struggling or dying or wounded. So when they sense vibrations, they can swim from long distances and they'll come and check out whatever is making the vibrations. People say don't swim with a dog because the dog paddling in the water attracts sharks, which it most likely would because of the vibrations and the splashing going around. And then there's people who say that if a shark is about to attack you, you should splash in the water to scare it away. It talks about that in the end of this book, and that is extremely false. Splashing just attracts sharks because, like I said, it makes the sharks think that there's a dying fish nearby, and so they'll go and attack it. The other thing is, everyone knows that sharks are attracted to blood. They can smell a single drop from, I think, I don't remember, like 2 miles away, 1 mile, 5 miles, something like that. Anyway, so, and almost always there's more than 1 drop. But anyway, there was this story I remember reading somewhat recently. There were 8 people swimming together at a beach, and, well, 8 men, and then 1 woman. The woman was on her period, and there was this great white that swam past all 8 men and then attacked the woman. And that was because she was bleeding, of course. So what I always say, just you should not be swimming if you're on your period, because if the blood leaks into the water, then you are 100%, there's a large chance that you will get attacked by a shark if there's a shark around. So I would worry about that. But the other thing is, I really like sharks, and if I could, I would, like, if I lived by a beach, which I don't, I would go diving with tiger sharks. To me, they're probably my favorite shark, And if you've ever seen videos of them, there's like National Geographic videos, stuff like that, people diving with tiger sharks, and they're actually extremely friendly, and you can pet them, and they like scratches under the chin and on their belly. Of course, you should be wearing gloves because rubbing against a shark's skin will cause you to bleed, because the skin has denticles or something like that. And they are basically teeth that cover the shark's entire skin, and they protect the shark. If anything rubs against it, it will bleed and get cut. And people will say, punch a shark on the nose to deter it. Yes, that works, but if you're punching a shark on the nose with your bare hand, you're also going to be bleeding and losing parts of your hand as you're smacking the shark. That was told about in the 3rd book. Multiple people who were brushed up against a shark, and then the shark comes at them, and they start smacking it, and they're just like getting chunks torn from their hand as they're smacking it on the nose. So I'd say more effective, poke it in the eye. That's what one guy did, and the shark let go, and he was able to make it to the shore. And there was stories of people who were just swimming, and the shark brushed up against them, and it caused them to bleed. And then when the shark noticed that there was blood, it attacked the person further. And also, there was one guy who was, he just somehow, there was a shark swimming nearby, somehow he got his arm into the mouth of the shark without even realizing it, scraped it up, and then the shark attacked him because of the blood in the water. And my favorite story of all time, my favorite shark attack, was there's this one guy who he got attacked, I think it was a tiger shark that bit him on the leg. And so he kind of floats up in the water, sticks his leg forward, and then as the shark is biting him, he goes to punch it. Well, it lets go of his leg and then chomps his arm straight off as he's going to punch it. So, I mean, that's kind of sad for him, but it's my favorite story because it's brutal but kind of funny at the same time. I feel bad for him, though. But then there was, well, also basking sharks that are supposedly harmless. I mean, they would be normally. But there were people who, like, basking sharks used to, and they still might, tear up nets as they swam past. So fishermen would get angry, so they called out an order to kill all basking sharks that could be caught. And that made it so that they basically put these steel rams onto the bottom of ships so they could cut the sharks in half when they swam at them. Well, when the boat propelled at them, then the shark would get chopped up and die. But there was also this boat that was harpooning basking sharks, and they threw a harpoon at it and went into the shark. Shark got really upset, jumped out of the water, crushed their boat, and all 5 people aboard were killed. So there's a case of a basking shark killing 5 people. Now there's no reports of a whale shark killing anyone, but they're certainly capable of. One smack from the tail and you could easily be dead. Okay. So I'll continue on with this chapter. Jacques Cousteau is a famous oceanographer. He was diving one day when he came face to face with a great white. Cousteau thought his life was about to end, but the great white turned in the water and was gone. Who knows why? Perhaps Cousteau was simply lucky. Well, that's the other thing. If a great white, well, yeah, he was diving. So he was diving, it says. So that means he was fully submerged in the water. If a great white sees you, it's not going to attack you. It says, who knows why it swam off? Well, I know why. It's because great whites generally won't attack humans. Because, like I said earlier, they hate the taste of humans. And they have no reason to. They mistake humans, like the times you're going to get attacked by a shark, first of all, if you're bleeding, that includes on your period. Second, if you're splashing around. Third, if you are paddleboarding, like you're on your surfboard, but you have your arms and legs out, and then a shark's going to mistake you for a seal. And that's almost always a great white. It sees you from below because that's how they attack their prey sometimes. They'll be directly under it, swim straight up. And so it sees what looks like a seal because your arms and legs are out in the surfboard. So then it attacks you and you probably die, who knows. And also sometimes they'll mistake you for a turtle. The other time is, of course, if you're threatening a shark, which is a provoked attack, people who are poking it or one guy who grabbed the tail of a nurse shark and it turned around and bit him on the arm. And so provoked attacks, there's less than the unprovoked attacks, but usually it turns out bad either way. And so certainly some people, well, and I guess another time, spear fishermen, they shoot a fish and the shark will either go for the fish or they go for the spear fisherman. Sometimes that happens. There's been stories, people who tied the fish that they speared onto their belt, and as they're swimming to the surface, the shark either took, some of them, the sharks took the fish and snapped them right off. Another one actually went straight for the diver, ignored the fish. But that's because there's blood in the water and it just sees, to a shark it sees prey. If there's blood in the water, they'll attack anything that's moving in all of that water with the blood in it. Okay, I'll continue on. Brian Rogers was not so lucky. In 1961, he was spearfishing with a friend, Rodney Fox. They were in the water off Adelaide, Australia. A white shark grabbed Brian from below. It took the lower part of his body in its mouth. Brian stabbed at the shark's eyes. He speared the top of its head. The shark let go, but Brian's leg was ripped to shreds. He knew he would quickly bleed to death. Death from loss of blood is common after shark bite. Brian wrapped the rubber sling of his spear gun around his leg. He began swimming for shore. He probably prayed that the shark was not swimming behind him. He probably expected to feel those teeth again. A rowboat picked him up. Brian's wounds needed 3 hours of surgery, but he did not live. Here's the other thing, like I said before. This quote right here. He probably prayed that the shark was not swimming behind him. He probably expected to feel those teeth again. Well, that was back before we knew too much about sharks, 1961. So maybe he did expect to feel the teeth again. But the thing about him praying that the shark was not swimming behind him, it wasn't going to, because a shark isn't going to attack you more than once. Once it tastes you, it's deciding that ain't food. And so pretty much any other shark will bump into its prey before it bites it, just to get a sense of what it is. A great white shark is the only shark that'll straight up bite it without doing anything else first. Okay. Rodney Fox, who was with him, did not see the attack. He saw the great white, though. After it bit Brian, it swam towards Rodney. Then it turned and swam away. Once again, it says, who knows why? There are a few answers to the mysteries of the great whites. And yes, I just explained, we do know why. Rodney's luck held that day, but it didn't 2 years later. In 1963, he was spearfishing, once again spearfishing. There was a sudden quiet in the deep water around him. It was a silence, he said. Then something huge hit me on the left side. I knew at once what had happened and was dazed with horror. It was a great white. Rodney reached behind him, trying to stab the shark's eyes. His arm went down the shark's throat. He pulled it out and felt the teeth rip strips off his skin. The shark let go, and Rodney shot to the surface. Then he saw the shark beside him again with his jaws open. Rodney wrapped his arms and legs around the huge body. The shark dived. Rodney held on with all his strength. He went under too. The great white scraped his body on the rocks. It felt the rider and wanted to be rid of him. Rodney let go and shot again to the surface. He had to have air. That is one of the terrors of a shark attack. The shark can breathe underwater. The shark came back. Rodney had a fish float hooked to his belt. This time the shark grabbed the float. Rodney tried desperately to unhook his belt, but he couldn't. The shark's sharp teeth unhooked it for him. They cut clear through it. Rodney was free again. For the third time he came to the surface. This time he saw a boat. "Shark! Shark!" he yelled. The men on the boat pulled him on board. It took 462 stitches and 4 hours of surgery to sew Rodney up, but he too lived. Now that's a whole lot of stitches. I've seen some 300 stitches is probably what I'd say average from an entire bite to your chest or whatever. Usually it'd be less if it was a smaller shark, but that means it was a really big shark with 462 stitches. Henry Borse was attacked while taking underwater pictures. In November 1964, summertime Australia, Henry and two friends were photographing seals. There were lots of seals around, but at once they all seemed to disappear. The water was quite empty, Henry said. There was a split second of eerie silence. The divers knew that something was wrong. They eased back towards the boat, but it was too late. It is always probably too late when that silence comes. Nature and its creatures helplessly wait. The shark lifted Henry in his jaws and right out of the water. He was able to scream "shark" before he was pulled under. The great white was shaking him. It was, Henry said, the way a dog would shake an old slipper. And that's the most common comparison. When they say when a shark is shaking you, I've heard It was like an old slipper. It was like a dog shaking a bone or shaking a stick, just pretty much a dog shaking anything. Then it let him go. When Henry got to the surface, he was missing his left leg. He was taken by a boat to shore. An ambulance speeded him to the hospital. Henry also lived. There's a second chapter to the Henry Bourse story, and it's stranger than fiction. Henry got an artificial left leg. After some time, he was able to go back in the water. He began diving again, and in 1968, his left leg was bitten off for the second time by a great white shark. There was no blood this time because it just bit off his artificial leg. In 1976, Rob Rebstock was a student. He, his brother, and two friends were scuba diving off Santa Barbara, California. Rob jumped out of their boat. He trod water while his brother handed him his scuba gear. A great white shark shot up beneath Rob. It caught both his legs in its jaws and bit them together. Then it lifted itself and Rob out of the water and spat. Rob flew from its mouth and fell on his back. His brother and friends pulled him onto the boat. Rob had a 3 by 5 inch hole in his right thigh. There were 6 teeth marks in his left leg. The teeth had gone through the wetsuit clear to the bone. The shark did not chomp down on Rob. If it had, his legs would have been bitten off. It was a horror for Rob. It was a horror, too, for those in the boat. They were 5 lucky people. They were 5 of the rare breed, the ones that got away. The human spirit is strong. Jacques Cousteau still makes underwater dives. He shares with us the secrets of the oceans. Brian Rogers enjoys deep-sea shark fishing. Rodney Fox still dives. He leads groups on the search for the great white shark. Henry Bourse is a professional diver. He works on offshore oil rigs and has made shark films. Sometimes he leaves the artificial leg on shore when he dives. Today, Rob Rebstock is an attorney. He lives in Santa Barbara so he can still be near the water. He still surfs and dives in the same ocean where Big Whitey grabbed him in 1976. These are ocean people, however, lovers of the sea. They will not allow themselves to be scared away. Perhaps they feel there is little danger of another attack. Lightning is not supposed to strike twice in the same place, but it struck Henry Bourse twice. The lightning was a great white shark rising from the dark depths. I think that's all I wanted to read out of this book. Okay, now I'm going to be reading from this book, Shadows in the Sea, The Sharks, Skates, and Rays. So this book talks about the 1916 shark attacks, and this book was written in 1963, so it's a really old book. And the 1916 shark attacks, which I didn't realize until recently, is the basis of this book, I Survived the Shark Attacks of 1916, which I really had no clue anything about the shark attacks until I read the Shadows in the Sea book. So I thought that was really interesting. It goes way in depth about that. And the I Survived book is basically, it's the exact same story except with different characters. So I'm going to be reading chapters from this book, I think only one chapter. And then I also have some information in the book I wanted to share. So first of all, we have this chart here. I'm going to take out the bookmark. We have this hilarious drawing here. Hope that's in focus. So you can see here, I'm gonna take a picture of this, put up on the screen too. Anyway, it shows the great white shark being almost the same size as a basking shark and probably 4 times the weight of a Greenland shark. Has a caption saying that the great white got over 36 feet long, basking shark was 40, and whale shark is 45. Then it includes the 6-foot man with that. Anyway, it's just horribly wrong to what we know today anyway. Okay, now I'm going to get into the reading. I'm going to start off with this theory here as to why sharks attack people for no reason whatsoever when they're in shallow water. Like if somebody isn't bleeding, there's no shiny objects, and there's no splashing or vibrations in the water. The reason that some sharks attack people, here's a theory. So, here we go. Some distance from the shore, while the bather is swimming in deep water, he is spotted by a shark, which silently glides near and sees a strange creature of fair size. Still curious but cautious, the shark lurks unseen. As the bather makes for shore, the shark follows. Then, When the bather's feet touch the bottom and he begins to wade in, to the shark's eyes it looks as if the strange, large creature it's been following has disappeared, and in its place are two smaller, slow-moving, inoffensive creatures that seem incapable of hostility, the bather's legs. Instinctively, the shark charges them, but as it does, the bather kicks and thrashes the water. Other bathers rush to his aid, churning the water still more. No cod or sea turtle ever acted this way, so the shark, confounded and frustrated by this unfamiliar behavior of prey, hastily withdraws. So that's the theory, and that's actually extremely accurate. I would say that's a really good theory. In my opinion, that explains a lot. Okay, now I'm going to be reading about the shark attacks of 1916. So let's get there. What is this bookmark for? Oh, and then there's this one too. Okay, so first there was a tiger shark thing I wanted to read from here. So, the enigma of shark is not left unchallenged. Scientists of shark-menaced shores from Florida to Australia are seeking to unravel the mystery. It is frustrating work. The typical dangerous shark is large, difficult to handle, and not designed for laboratory study. It often languishes in captivity, and whatever secrets of behavior it may reveal in a tank or pen are muted by its apathy and imprisonment. With patience and skill, however, scientists are managing today to keep sharks in captivity and study them. Dr. Eugene Clark is testing the behavior and the intelligence of large sharks of several species at the Cape Hayes Marine Laboratory on Siesta Key, Florida. Recently, Dr. Clark delivered 37 tiger shark pups by C-section. One survived. Thanks to constant, almost maternal care, the shark pup lived for 3.5 months while Dr. Clark scrupulously observed it. She hoped to learn when the shark reached maturity, an elementary fact, but one that is not positively known, so scant is our knowledge of sharks. One morning, Dr. Clark checked her shark pen and found the pup dead. It was killed, she believes, not by natural causes or by another shark, but by a vandal who sneaked into the laboratory compound, somehow caught the little shark and beat it over the head. With the aid of an anesthetic known as MS-222, sharks can be captured and subdued, experimented on or examined, and then returned to the sea unharmed. This anesthetic can knock out a 400-pound shark in 1 minute or less. It is merely squirted into the mouth of the shark or sprayed over the gill slits. A simple water pistol can be used. The anesthetic has been used extensively in recent experiments on sharks under conditions as close as possible to their normal environment. Anyway, then it shows a picture here of the woman that was working at the laboratory, Dr. Eugenie Clark, and she's holding a 34-inch tiger shark, which was the pup that was killed. So that was the day that she found it dead. And so that was the last one, and that's really sad that someone would kill it because, you know, in that time period, people were greatly afraid of sharks. If they got a chance, they'd kill it. They'd kill any shark they could possibly get their hands on. So just some idiotic person who didn't realize that the shark was no harm to anyone because they were too scared by sharks. Just murder the shark for no reason. And that shark could have helped research in the future after, you know, if it would have continued living. Because that would have been probably the first tiger shark to survive in captivity, lived 3.5 months until it got murdered, which is sad. Okay. Now, let's see, right here. Okay, Chapter 1, The Shadows Attack. Down the beach he ran, an impatient young man drawn to the cool and beckoning sea. He had arrived at the resort in Beach Haven, New Jersey, scarcely minutes before. And now, Saturday, July 1, 1916, Charles Van Sant was plunging into the surf. The shark attacks of 1916. He was 23 years old, and the other thing is, all these people are like 33 or under, all the ones killed. Some were kids, so I find that interesting. There was nobody old getting killed at this time period. They're almost all young men. Okay. He was 23 years old, and his life stretched before him as did the sea, invitingly, excitingly, seeming without end. On his own horizon, and on the horizon of millions of other young men, there hung a cloud of war. On the horizon of the sea around him there was not a cloud. Behind him, on the beach, a holiday crowd was gathering. Soon his father and two sisters would be there. He left them in their shorefront suite, unpacking and settling themselves. It had been too slow for him. Time had been too slow for him. He had spent ages on the hot jam train that carried him across the breadth of New Jersey from the Van Sant home in Philadelphia to the Long Beach Island, a narrow strip of land dotted with resorts like Beach Haven. Finally, the trip had ended. Charles rushed to the suite, hastily donned his bathing suit, threw on a robe, and rushed to the beach. As he dived in, he might have heard someone singing, "By the sea, by the sea, by the beautiful sea." The sea was beautiful in Beach Haven that day. Charles was a strong swimmer. With powerful strokes, he pulled away from shore. He swam out about 100 yards, far enough he decided for a first swim. Leisurely, reluctantly, he turned back toward shore, trying to prolong this serene and solitary communion with the sea. But he was not alone. Directly behind him, knifing toward him, straight and sure, was a gray shadow beneath a black fin that crested the water. They saw it from the beach. Bathers screamed, but the man did not hear their cries. Then suddenly they stood silent and motionless, frozen by the sight of the narrowing gap between Van Sant and the pursuing fin. He was still swimming excruciatingly slowly, unaware that he was being hunted in a deadly chase. He was close to shore when the water churned and red foam billowed around him. At that moment, Alexander Ott, a former U.S. Olympic team swimmer, dived into the sea and began to swim faster than he had ever swum before. As Ott reached the red blotch on the water, the gray shadow turned menacingly, then darted away for blue water, leaving Van Sant to the man who'd come to save him. Ott managed to get Van Sant to shore, and there on the warm sand, Van Sant's life ebbed away. His legs had been horribly ravaged. He died that night from shock and loss of blood. The gray shadow glided seaward, unseen and unheralded. No alarm was spread. No one could remember a shark ever having killed a swimmer before. Perhaps it had happened in the South Seas or in Australia, but never in New Jersey. And the experts said that there had never been an absolutely authenticated case of a shark attacking a swimmer anywhere in the world. Herman Oilricks, a wealthy New York banker, had offered a $500 prize to anyone who could prove to him that any bather actually had been attacked by a shark anywhere north of Cape Hatteras. The prize has gone unclaimed for 30 years. And of course, there we go. Claimed. Only 3 years before, on August 26, 1913, a fisherman had caught a shark off Spring Lake, New Jersey, 45 miles up the coast from Beach Haven. When the shark was cut open, a woman's foot wearing a tan shoe and knitted stocking was found in its stomach. But this gruesome discovery, like similar ones attested to down the years by numerous sailors and fishermen, was explained away. Though sharks might devour bodies, never would a shark attack a live swimmer. In Spring Lake on July 6, 5 days after Charles Van Sant was killed, more than 500 people were lounging or strolling on the beach. It was after lunch. The tide had ebbed. Relatively few swimmers were in the water. Children splashed at the water's edge. A few bathers stood in knee-deep water. Life was elegant and tranquil at Spring Lake, one of the favorite resorts of society. The socially prominent of Philadelphia, New Jersey, and New York gathered there. Some lived in fabulous shore homes they liked to call cottages. Others stayed at the New Monmouth Hotel or the Essex and Sussex Hotel. Secretary of the Treasury, William G. McAdoo, who was married to a daughter of President Wilson, was one of the leaders of Spring Lake Society. New Jersey Governor James F. Fielder and former Governor John Franklin Fort spent most of their summers there, and hundreds of wealthy New Yorkers had fled to Spring Lake with their children that year to escape the infantile paralysis epidemic in New York City. Since June 10, 165 persons had died of the disease in the city. On July 5 alone, 24 deaths had been reported, and there were rumors that the epidemic was spreading to New Jersey, so the talk on that July 6th afternoon in Spring Lake was not about the new Allied offensive against Huns or neutrality policy of Wilson. It was not about Wilson's chances of re-election or Charles Evans Hughes' chances of defeating him. It was not about sharks or the death of an obscure young man at a rather unfashionable beach resort 45 miles away 5 days before. Infantile paralysis dominated the conversations at Spring Lake just as it dominated the headlines in the New York City newspapers. In a Democratic seat, a bellboy was as good as a millionaire. Perhaps that's why Charles Bruder loved the sea. Charles was a bellboy at the Essex and Sussex Hotel when he was not working, could easily be found swimming. He was 28 years old, personable and well liked by hotel guests who considered him part of Spring Lake. Even people who had been coming to Spring Lake for much of their lives could not remember Spring Lake without him, for it was said that he had appeared there when he was 8 years old and had been working at various hotels every summer since. From the tips he earned, he supported himself and his only known relative, his mother, who lived in Switzerland. Bruder had the afternoon off on July 6th, and ebb tide or not, he was going swimming. He walked out through the surf, nodding and smiling at hotel guests he recognized. When the water reached his waist, he dived in and began to swim. He was soon beyond the lifelines. George White and Chris Anderson, the lifeguards on duty, did not call him back as they would have summoned most swimmers, for everybody knew that Charles Bruder was a strong swimmer. A woman's scream shattered the air of Spring Lake. Instinctively, White and Anderson turned narrowed eyes seaward. Bruder had disappeared. "He has upset," the woman screamed. "The man in the red canoe is upset." Even as she screamed, White and Anderson were racing toward their boat. They knew it was not the reflection of an overturned canoe they saw, for even now the red blot was spreading, and in the midst of it, for one awful moment, Bruder's agonized face appeared, and he flung up a bloodied arm. The boat reached him. White leaned from the bow and held out an oar to Bruder. Somehow he grasped it. They pulled him toward them. His face was sickeningly white, and his eyes were shut. "Shark! Shark got me. Bit my legs off," he gasped, and mercifully fainted. White hauled him over the gunwale. His body was not heavy. Mrs. George W. Childs, one of the principal envoys of the Philadelphia Society at Spring Lake, was standing on the private balcony outside her suite at the Essex and Sussex when she heard the screams from the beach. She turned to her maid and asked for her spyglass. Below on the shore she saw White and Anderson beaching their boat. She saw them hesitate to lay Bruder on the sand. From the crowd a woman darted forward to put down her linen coat, turning her eyes away as she did so. Several women fainted. Mrs. Childs, 74 years old and indomitable, did not faint. She went to the phone in her room, called the manager, and told him what she had seen. She also asked that her car be brought around. 3 minutes later she was speeding to Deal Beach, some 5 miles north. Her niece took a plunge in the surf there every afternoon, and Mrs. Childs wanted to get to Deal Beach before the shark did. Bruder was dead. The doctor called to tend him was treating the woman who had fainted. At the Essex and Sussex, the telephone operator was ringing up every central switchboard from Point Pleasant to the Atlantic Highlands. Within 12 minutes, swimmers were streaming ashore along 20 miles of New Jersey beaches. But was it a shark? Was it true that man-eaters were prowling the shore of New Jersey? Hotel men, resort operators, summer colonists wanted to be told that it could not happen. They anxiously awaited the verdict of Colonel William Gray Schoffer, an eminent physician and Surgeon General of the New Jersey National Guard. He had examined Bruder within 15 minutes after he had been taken from the sea. "There is not the slightest doubt," Colonel Schoffer reported, "that a man-eating shark has inflicted the injuries. Bruder's right leg was frighteningly torn and the bone bitten off halfway between the knee and ankle. The left foot was missing, as well as the lower end of the tibia and fibula. The leg bone was denuded of flesh from a point halfway below the knee. There was a deep gash above the left knee which penetrated to the bone. On the right side of the abdomen, low down, a piece of flesh as big as a man's fist was missing." That night, while hotel residents, at Mrs. Child's suggestion, took up a collection for Bruder's mother, motorboats equipped with searchlights slipped out to sea in a futile hunt for the shark. Colonel Schoffer called a meeting of resort owners and town officials to discuss ways to make the beaches safe from sharks. Rifle-toting boatmen were hired to patrol the beaches. Fishermen volunteered to fish for the shark with great hooks, sturdy lines, and chunks of prime mutton, reportedly the best shark bait, donated by cooperative Spring Lake meat markets. "I'm certain that the bathing beaches will be made safe within 2 or 3 days," Councilman D.H. Hill announced. No shark was caught, shot, or ever seen. The day Bruder was killed, 24 people died in New York City of polio, then called infantile paralysis. Bruder's death received far larger coverage in the newspapers. Such is the glamour and terror of the shark. Each resort town along the New Jersey coast went on its own brave way. Atlantic City was more upset by a ban on bathing suits that exposed the nether extremities than by sharks. Although some daring souls made an adventure out of the shark scare by contemptuously swimming beyond the end of the piers. At Asbury Park, with a flourish of publicity, a motorboat shark patrol was begun and workmen were set to enclosing the bathing area with shark-proof wire netting. A net was not necessary, according to a sea captain interviewed as a shark authority. Sharks scared easily, he said. The best thing to do when a shark comes along, he advises, shout as loud as you can and splash the water with your hands and feet. Although now we know that splashing attracts sharks and makes them more likely to attack you. But it also depends on the shark. A large shark's going to attack you. A smaller one might be scared away by that. But not the sharks that are killing people in this instance. The Atlantic seemed alive with sharks and tales of sharks. At Spring Lake, a lifeguard told of battling a 12-foot shark with an oar some 50 feet offshore. At Bayonne, New Jersey, 20 boys were swimming off a yacht club float when they saw a shark. A policeman heard their cries and emptied his revolver at an ominous blackfin. The shark, he said, fled to the open sea. In shallow water off Eldred's Bar near Rockaway Point in Brooklyn, 8 men digging for sandworms saw a shark driving a school of weakfish toward shore. With eel tongs, oars, spears, and spades, they said they slashed at it and killed it. All along the coast, shark vigilantes were firing their rifles at anything that looked big and moved in the sea. Finally, out of this hysterical war on sharks, porpoises, and any other shadows in the sea, came the sobering voice of an academic authority. Dr. John Treadwell Nichols, curator of the Department of Fishes in the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and Dr. Robert Cushman Murphy of the Brooklyn Museum, declared that there was very little danger a shark would attack anyone. Dr. Frederick A. Lucas, director of the Museum of Natural History, added his agreement. No shark, he said, could snap off a man's leg like a carrot. A shark's jaws were simply not powerful enough to do the kind of bodily damage Dr. Schaffler described. Dr. Lucas insisted, and that's extremely false. A large shark would easily chomp you in half. The experts had spoken. The shark scare abated somewhat. New Jersey bathers believed that they could once more enter the water unafraid, but the shark panic had cost New Jersey resort owners an estimated $250,000 in lost tourist business. In some areas, bathing had fallen off more than 75%. 6 weeks of summer still remained, and with plenty of hard work, the resort owners assured each other the loss could be made up. Yeah, back then that was way more money. $250,000 back then. These days that's a whole lot more. And then the kind of somewhat placebo effect, I guess it would kind of be classified as, since the scientists, even though the sharks were killing people, and then the scientists and experts are like, oh, it's completely safe, then everyone they're like, oh, okay, I agree with that. Even though, technically it still is almost entirely safe. But that people are just so easily influenced by authority figures. It's kind of sad sometimes. Like they should just have their own opinions. But nope, they don't. Tiger sharks will hold but little terror for bathers in the waters hereabouts within a few days, the New York Times reported from Asbury Park on July 10th. Today, the final work was being rushed on the net protectors about the Asbury Park beaches, and in Ocean Grove, the contractors who received the job of erecting steel nets began work. At 4th Avenue, where the grounds had been enclosed by steel nets, a record-breaking crowd of bathers enjoyed the surf. The dispatch was not entirely optimistic, for it reported that a fishing boat had sighted 4 sharks 8 miles off Asbury Park. Another shark had been reported 200 yards off Bridgehampton, Long Island, by Esterbrook Carter, nephew of Charles E. Hughes, the Republican candidate for president. Carter, along with other Republicans, was relieved to learn that Hughes had spent the day indoors polishing his speech accepting the nomination. Officials of the U.S. Bureau of Fisheries in Washington try to dispel the fear of sharks en masse. A single shark, they theorize, was probably responsible for both fatal attacks. Because of a scarcity of for food fish, off the New Jersey shore, they said this renegade shark may have been driven far inshore and, maddened by hunger, attacked Van Sant. Then, having acquired a taste for human flesh, it continued swimming near shore until its appetite was satisfied by brooder. It was a ghastly theory, and an apparent attempt to still renewed apprehension. U.S. Commissioner of Fisheries Hugh M. Smith hastily pointed out on July 9th that the case is extremely unusual. I don't look for it to happen again. The fact that only 2 out of millions of bathers have been attacked in many years is evidence of the rarity of such instances. Again, the very best assurance from an expert. On a map, Matawan, New Jersey appears to be an inland town. It is 11 miles west of the Atlantic Ocean and 2 miles south of Raritan Bay, a body of water that blends into the lower bay, gateway to the great port of New York. Matawan's only link to salt water is a tenuous one, a meandering tidal creek, barely a stream at high tide, that empties into Raritan Bay. The summer of 1916, as in countless summers before, Matawan boys spent every minute they could in the Matawan Creek. The most popular swimming hole was the old propeller Wyckoff dock, named after the tug-sized steamer Wyckoff, which years before used to come up the creek with the tide to pick up farmers' produce and carry it to the New York market on the next tide. The dock had deteriorated into a dozen or so pilings that jutted close to one another along the edge of a dilapidated pier. Diving and jumping off the pier and the pilings were not adventurous enough for the boys who swam at Wyckoff Dock, so they usually played tag, hopping from piling to piling in pursuit of one another. One day in early July 1916, Rennie Carton, aged 14, was playing tag on the Wyckoff Pillings. To escape an outreaching hand, Rennie dived into the creek. As his head and shoulders entered the murky water, he felt something like a strip of very coarse sandpaper grate along his stomach. He arched his body to the surface and stroked for the pier. His stomach was streaked with blood as he clambered up a piling and onto the dock. I think it's pilling, I don't know. "Don't dive in anymore," he shouted to his companions. "There's a shark or something in there." No one paid much attention to Rennie, and as a matter of fact, he ignored his own warning a few minutes later by diving into the creek. He was in a hurry to get home. It was much quicker to swim across the creek than to walk to the nearest bridge. More than 40 years later, the scars from the sandpaper leg burns still on his stomach. Rensselaer Carton would stand by the creek and, shaking his head, say to one of the authors, "It might have been me, it might have been me." On July 11th in Belford, on Sandy Hook Bay, a few miles east of the mouth of Matawan Creek, Herman Tarnow, a fisherman, caught a 9-foot shark 120 feet out from the low water mark. No one paid much attention to Herman Tarnow either, because at this time, not a single person thought that a shark would be capable of killing someone. Like, why would they? They're cowardly, is how they described sharks back then. The shark is a coward that would never attack anyone. And boy, were they wrong. The other theory as to why the sharks were coming into the shallow water was global warming, which would make sense because, as far as I've known my entire life, there's always been sharks swimming through shallow water right next to swimmers at beaches. And I never thought about the fact that they didn't do that until 1916. I think that's amazing. I never had a clue that sharks weren't always in shallow water. Before 1916, they were always going through deep water. They never went close to swimmers at beaches. But because of global warming, they started going into shallower water and warmer waters, and that's when people began getting attacked. In the late morning of July 12th, Captain Thomas Cottrell, a retired sailor and part-time local fisherman, was walking along a new trolley drawbridge that crossed Matawan Creek about 1.5 miles down creek from Wyckoff Dock. 11 days had passed since Charles Van Sant had died at Beach Haven, 70 miles as a shark would swim from Matawan. 6 days had passed since Charles Bruder had died at Spring Lake, 25 miles as a shark would swim from Matawan. Now, as Captain Cottrell walked across the bridge that hot, bright morning, He saw a dark gray shadow sweeping up the creek with the incoming tide. The shadow was moving swiftly, but the captain, a man who trusted his eyes, believed what he had seen. He shouted to 2 workmen on the bridge. They saw the shadow too. They ran to a telephone and called John Mulson, a barber who was also Mattawan chief of police. Captain Cottrell ran the half-mile to the Mattawan Center. He tried to stop groups of boys who were heading for the creek. He toured Mattawan's short and busy lower Main Street, shouting his warning to the merchants and their customers. Everyone laughed at the idea of a shark in a shallow creek, only 35 feet across at its widest point. Chief Molson did not even leave his barber shop. Captain Cottrell walked back towards the creek. Because, back then there was apparently no thing that they realized as a bull shark. They didn't realize sharks went in fresh water. The bull shark back then was called the cub shark for whatever reason. And it just isn't even listed as a dangerous shark. This book lists all the species of dangerous sharks and doesn't even mention the bull shark or cub shark as it was called. In the back of the book it talks about pretty much every species of shark discovered at that point, and there it mentions the cub shark. It says also called the bull shark, but not once in this book does it say that the bull shark is dangerous, and they are referred to as the most dangerous shark to man today, and they have, I think, maybe the 3rd most deaths, but I think 2nd most attacks. Because people back then didn't realize that a shark could swim in the fresh water, because that's just not a thing most fish do, because of the salt levels. Okay. One of the shops Captain Cottrell stuck his head into on the futile trip up Main Street was Stanley Fisher's new dry cleaning establishment. Stanley, one of Mattawan's best-liked young men, had only recently started this business, which had shown no promise of making his fortune. As a sideline, he was also taking orders for men's suits. He had made an unusual sale a few days before. A man had come in and bought a suit. Instead of paying cash for it, he had bought Stanley a $10,000 life insurance policy. Stanley, a blonde-haired, 210-pound giant of a man, was taking a ribbing from his friends. He was, after all, only 24 years old, in the prime of his life, they told him. What would he need an insurance policy for? Stanley's father, Watson H. Fisher, had followed the sea most of his life and risen to Commodore of the Savannah Line. Now retired and well off, he was one of Mattawan's leading citizens. If he had ever wished that his son might go to sea, he had kept the wish to himself. Some people in Mattawan did say, though, that it was a shame a big, strong man like Stanley was running a dry cleaning store instead of sailing the seas as his father had before him. July 12th was a scorching, muggy day. The heat was nearly unbearable in Anderson's sawmill, where Lester Stillwell worked with his father, William Stillwell. By 2 o'clock, Lester had finished nailing up his last wooden box, a task he was especially good at, and since he was only 12 years old, he was given the rest of the day off. He waved goodbye to his father, dashed out of the stifling mill, and headed for Wyckoff Dock with his pals, John Carton, Frank Close, Albert O'Hara, and Charles Van Brunt. Soon they were all splashing around in the creek. Most of them, like Lester, were not wearing bathing suits, so basically they're all naked. Albert O'Hara, aged 11, was near the dock about to climb out of the water when Lester yelled, "Watch me float, fellas." Albert turned to look. Lester was so thin he usually had trouble floating. At that instant, something hard and slippery slammed Albert's right leg. He looked down and saw what looked like sinuous tail of a huge fish. Charles Van Brunt, 13, still in the water, saw it too. It was the biggest, blackest fish he had ever seen, and it was streaking for Lester Stillwell. Lester screamed. Charles saw the big black fish strike, his body suddenly twisting as it hit Lester, and Charles saw that the fish was not all black, for as it rolled it exposed its stark white belly and gleaming teeth. And Charles knew, to his everlasting horror, that he had seen a shark. In an instant it all but closed its jaws around Lester's slim body and dragged him beneath the reddening waters of Mattawan Creek. Lester had neither time nor life to scream again. Lester's pals and other boys who'd been swimming nearby scampered out of the water. Some ran in a fisher's bag factory at the creek and summoned workmen to Wyckoff Dock. Others ran up the street, dirt road from the creek, and raced to the center of town. Now where Captain Cottrell had walked there was panic and screaming. Naked boys. Boys who'd seen the shark were yelling, "Shark! Shark! A shark got Lester!" Along the shore by the dock, Those who knew that only Lester Stillwell had gone under were calling his name. Lester, Lester. Out of this tumult somehow came the report that Lester, a boy who took fits, had been seized by an attack and was drowning. All that the townspeople knew for sure was that a boy was in trouble at the creek, and men, women, and children began running there to help him. Among them was Stanley Fisher, who had ducked into the back of his dry cleaning shop only long enough to put on a bathing suit. "Remember what Captain Cottrell said," Mary Anderson, a Mattawan teacher, shouted at Fisher as he ran. "It may have been a shark." Fisher stopped for a moment. "A shark? Here?" he asked. He looked immense as he stood there, towering above Mary Anderson. "I don't care," he said, finally answering some inner doubt. "I'm going after that boy." Then, returning to his errand boy, 8-year-old Johnny Smith, who was standing nearby, Fisher said, "Take care of the store until I get back," and Fisher sprinted to the creek. Man, that guy's going to take care of that store for the rest of his life, probably. Anyway, the son of Commodore Fisher took command at Mattawan Creek. His quarterdeck was Wyckoff Dock, and his enemy was a shark. Some 200 townspeople, including Lester Stillwell's mother and father, lined the dock and nearer bank. Fisher soon had men and boats pulling for Lester's body. Someone brought a roll of chicken wire to the dock. Fisher ordered a couple of young men to get in a rowboat and string the chicken wire weighed down with stones along the bottom of the creek, down creek from the dock, where the channel was about 20 feet wide. Fisher knew that there was a deep spot off the farther bank directly opposite the dock. There he believed the shark was lurking with Lester's body. Fisher's plan was to flush out the shark, driving it into shallower water down creek, where it would be trapped by the chicken wire barrier, but the hastily strung fence only partially blocked the creek. When this futile fence was completed, Fisher dived into the creek. Several men were in the water, diving to the bottom, feeling in the mud for Lester's body. Fisher swam alone to the deep spot. Arthur Smith, 51, a carpenter by trade and hunter by avocation, was diving too. On shore, his daughter was screaming to him, "Come back, Pa, come back." The task was for younger men, but Smith kept diving, defying the death that swam by him and finally touched him. A day would come when Arthur Smith, half blind and almost deaf at 95, would sit hunched and feeble in an old house on the bank of Mattawan Creek. Suddenly, at shouted mention of that awful day, he would spring forward in his chair and vividly recreate that moment when he felt the shark scrape his leg. At 95, he'd still carry the scars and show them off to one of the authors. Smith saw Fisher make 2 overhangs, powerful overhand strokes, and dive down, down. Arthur S. Van Buskirk, a local deputy of the Monmouth County Detective's Office, had just arrived at the creek. He was sitting on the forward deck of a small boat when he saw a thrashing in the water at the farther shore. Even as he looked, the water calmed and a rapidly widening red stain spread on the surface. Van Buskirk yelled at the other man in the boat to start the engine, and while it spurred to life, Van Buskirk sculled towards the red stain, in the midst of which Stanley Fisher had suddenly appeared. Fisher was facing the farther bank. The silent crowd at Wyckoff Dock could see only his broad back and shoulders. He was drawn up, half crouching in waist-deep water, and he seemed to be tottering on one leg. The boat pulled up directly behind Fisher. Van Buskirk, man, I can't pronounce that, could see that Fisher was holding the bloody remains of his right leg in both hands. Just as Fisher was about to pitch forward and face first into the water, Van Buskirk reached out and pulled him into his arms. He could get Fisher only halfway out of the water. The boat backed out of the shoal water, and as it turned to head toward the dock, a gasp rippled through the crowd. Now they could see Fisher breasting the water like a macabre figurehead on the prow of the boat. Enough of him was out of the water so that his terrible wound could be seen. From groin to kneecap, the flesh was gone from his right leg. Several women fainted. Little Alfreda Matz, one of the many children on the dock, tried to look, but her father threw the tail of his suit coat over her eyes and hugged her face to his side. She thought, "A crocodile bit Mr. Fisher." A sound like a moan went up as the boat neared the dock, for Fisher almost slipped from Van Buskirk's grasp. Staring down at Fisher's leg, it was hardly more than a bone that bore jagged scratches running lengthwise along it. Van Buskirk saw blood pulsating from a torn artery. There was a rope on the deck beneath him, and he thought of tying a tourniquet with one hand. His own weight and that of his burden combined to prevent him from getting the rope. and he almost lost his grip on Fisher as well. Just then, hands reached out from the dock and grabbed Fisher. He was still conscious. Gently, men placed Fisher on a stretcher improvised from planks and bore him to the Mattawan Railroad about a quarter of a mile away. Each jolting step up from the bank and along the track stabbed him with searing pain. Mirthful unconsciousness awaited him, but he seemed to fight it off. There's something he very much wanted to say. At the station, they placed him on a baggage car and waited for the next train. The doctor had been found. There's little he could do other than retard the flow of blood. Nearly 3 hours went by until the 5:06 train from Long Branch was flagged down. Even on the train, Fisher held on to consciousness. Not till 7:45 that night, as he was wheeled into the operating room at Monmouth Memorial Hospital, did he die. Before he died, he had said what he wanted to say. On the bottom of Mattawan Creek, he had reached the body of Lester Stillwell and wrestled it from the jaws of the shark. While Fisher lay on the baggage car waiting for death and the 5:06, several men went to Asher P. Woolley's store and got dynamite to blow up the shark they believed to still be off Wyckoff Dock. The creek was cleared of boats, but moments before the charge was to be set off, a motorboat hove into the view from Down Creek. Jacob R. Lefferts, a Mattawan lawyer, was at the wheel. Lying on the bottom of the boat was a boy. His right leg was swathed in bloody bandages. "A shark got him," Lefferts shouted as he pulled in to shore. The boy was transferred to a car and speeded to St. Peter's Hospital in New Brunswick. At first, the boy would not give his name. He was afraid his mother would be angry at him. Soon he was identified as Joseph Dunn, aged 14. He had been swimming with his older brother, Michael, and several other boys off the dock of the New Jersey Clay Company brickyards about half a mile down Mattawan Creek near Keyport. Someone had run to the brickyards and told the boys about the shark. They were all in the water when the warning came, and they swam swiftly to the dock. Joseph Dunn, the youngest, was the last one out of the water. As he started up the ladder, something that felt like a big pair of scissors, he said, grabbed his right leg. "I felt my leg going down the shark's throat," he said later. "I believe it would have swallowed me." Joseph screamed, and the older boy sprung to the ladder. Joseph kicked the water with his free leg. Michael Dunn and two others began a tug-of-war with the shark, ripping Joseph's flesh to save his life. For a moment or two, the shark hung on, and suddenly Joseph was free. The shark had let go and vanished. Its third victim, in less than an hour, had been snatched from death. At St. Peter's Hospital, hope was high that Joseph Dunn's life would be saved, but saving his torn leg slashed with tooth marks, a major tendon severed, muscles badly mangled, seemed hopeless. Dr. R.J. Falkingham, on general surgical advice at the hospital, was given the case. All that night and into the morning, Mattawan Creek was the scene of an orgy of vengeance. Blast after blast of dynamite sent geysers of water and fish skyward. Hundreds of men lined both banks, armed with scythes, pitchforks, and old harpoons taken from the living room walls. By lantern light and the first glimmer of dawn, men fired shotguns and pistols into the creek. At low tide, men waded into the water with knives and even hammers. The creek was soon laced with tangles of chicken wire and fishing nets. Newspaper reporters and photographers swarmed into Mattawan, and one newspaper proclaimed that it had organized a shark hunt. A boat loaded to the gunwales with men carrying rifles. Extra large charges of dynamite were set off for the benefit of newsreel cameras. Stores in Mattawan and Keyport ran out of explosives and ammunition. A special order was sent to Perth Amboy, New Jersey for more. "We've got a shark," a man shouted here, then there. Reports came in with the tide. 1 shark, 2 sharks, 3 sharks, 4 sharks were trapped in Mattawan Creek. With the outgoing tide went reports that the shark had escaped from Mattawan Creek. The only respite from the frenzy at the creek came when Mattawan buried his dead. The boys who'd been the last to see Lester Stillwell alive bore him to his grave. At first, the Methodist Church on Main Street, Stanley Fisher's voice was missing. At the First Methodist Church on Main Street, Stanley Fisher's voice was missing from the choir that mourned him, but his memory would live on forever in the church. With money from the new insurance policy he had so strangely acquired, Stanley's parents purchased a stained glass window, a landscape of Bethlehem. In the years to come, the rays of the setting sun would filter through the window as days end to come to the little town of Mattawan. At St. Peter's Hospital, Dr. Falkingham was quietly, skillfully tending the wounds of Joseph Dunn. Newspapers had already reported that Joseph's leg undoubtedly would have to be amputated, but Dr. Falkingham didn't have time to read the newspapers. He had sutured Joseph's severed tendon and ripped muscles, and a slow, uncertain recovery began. It would be 59 days before Joseph Dunn would walk out of St. Peter's Hospital, but walk he would on two strong legs. 6 days after the attack, the shark was finally caught in Matawan Creek by none other than Captain Cottrell. He was coming up the creek in his motorboat Scud with his son-in-law Richard Lee when about 400 yards from the bay, not far from the bridge where he had first seen that lethal shadow, he saw a dorsal fin rise out of the water, then disappear. Swiftly, he and Lee let out several yards of gill net weighted with lead at the bottom and strung with corks on the top. The net billowed out as the outgoing tide carried it down creek. Both ends of the net were secured in the boat. By deft maneuvering, the captain trapped the shark between boat and net. The shark struggled furiously, but foot by foot the two men hauled in the net, which was to be the shark's shroud. Using the whole of the boat as an anvil, Cottrell smashed the shark on the head again and again with a large mallet. When he was convinced the shark was dead, Cottrell hauled it ashore. It weighed 230 pounds and was almost exactly 7 feet long. He put it on exhibition in his fish shed. Nearly everyone in Matawan and Keyport lined up to see it as it lay on ice. They paid 10 cents each to view the terror of Matawan Creek. In Bridgehampton, Long Island, scene of another shark scare, a fisherman caught a shark, rented a zinc-lined coffin from a local undertaker, and exhibited his shark for 5 cents a look. Actually, the killer of Matawan Creek may have been caught 2 days after the attack. Michael Schlesler, a New Yorker who is one of the many shark hunters prowling at the local waters on July 14, was dragging a drift net behind his boat in hopes of snagging a shark. He was in Raritan Bay off South Amboy, New Jersey, less than 4 miles northwest of the mouth of Matawan Creek, when a large shark charged the net. Though quickly enmeshed, the 8.5-foot shark fought savagely, snapping a jaw in which row upon row of teeth glistened menacingly. Schlesser, and unaware that he had cut a shark of the most feared species in the sea, strained to haul the net closer to the boat and clubbed the shark again and again. Although many other sharks were being hauled in and displayed by fishermen, Schlesler's shark was a killer. As Schlesler opened up and tumbled into the net, he might have become another victim. For when he finally subdued the shark, towed it to South Amboy, and ripped it open, he found 15 pounds of flesh and bones in its belly. One of the bones, 11 inches long, was identified as the shin bone of a boy. Another fragment appeared to be part of a human rib. There was no doubt the shark had probably attacked and certainly eaten at least one human being. Dr. Lucas of the Museum of Natural History, skeptical about shark attacks only a few days before, personally identified the remains as human. The shark itself was identified too. It was a great white shark, feared as a man-eater in tropical waters, but until the period dealt with here, unreported along beaches as far north as New Jersey. Dr. Nichols, an expert who joined with the doctors Murphy and Lucas in minimizing the possibility of shark attacks after the first two New Jersey killings, now joined them in conceding the existence of dangerous sharks in northern Atlantic waters. They concluded that Schlesler's Carcharodon carcharias was probably responsible for all 5 attacks. Whether or not this conservative estimate was accurate, it's possible that there were many of these dangerous sharks in the waters at the time. And now we know that the shark was definitely a bull shark, because great white sharks can't survive in fresh water. Plus the fact that it was only, well, the sharks were only around 7 to 9 feet long. That's about bull shark size. Bull sharks don't get too much bigger than 12 feet. The record was like 13, almost exactly, like 13 foot 1 inch, I think. And great white sharks are obviously much bigger, but we know now, not 36 feet, not 40. Their estimates back then were way wrong. Anyway, Schlesler, who had had some training as a taxidermist, mounted his shark and placed it on exhibit at a New York newspaper office. Later, the jaws of the New Jersey man-eater wound up in the window of a Broadway fish shop. The capture of the apparent killer did not stop the stories that were sweeping the eastern seaboard. From Florida to Rhode Island came reports of sharks. Virtually every ship that came into New York carried a cargo of shark stories. Several hundred sharks were reported off Fire Island, Long Island, and posses were formed to track them down. Theories abounded too. One was that heavy cannonading in the northern sea had driven sharks across the Atlantic to more tranquil seas. Another theory held that sharks were feeding on swimmers because they had been deprived of their usual diet of refuse from passenger liners whose sailings were being curtailed by another kind of shark, the U-boat. The European War also spawned the idea that sharks had been feasting so well on war dead floating down rivers into the sea that they had undergone a change of dietary habits. One New York Times letter writer gravely calculated the figures. More than 12,500 war casualties had been gobbled up by sharks, he claimed. By stoking their imaginations a little more, some of the theorists concluded that the ghoul sharks of the European waters had deserted their bountiful feeding grounds in the war zone for the far less ample larder offered by New Jersey bathing beaches. Now the thing is, there are 4 sharks that will guaranteed, most sharks aren't going to like the taste of humans. There's 4 that will guaranteed just eat you if they have the chance. And so one of them is the bull shark. Sure, they generally attack by accident. They don't mean to attack you. They'll still eat you, though, as seen in the case with the 4 people that were killed. The second one is the Greenland shark. People have been found inside Greenland sharks. The third one is the six-gill shark, the blunt-nosed six-gill, who lives in the deep sea but will come up and has been known to eat people. There's River Monsters episode about it. And the fourth is the oceanic white tip. There's also a River Monsters episode about it. But anyway, the oceanic white tip has probably the highest death count of any shark, but it's not really recorded as shark attacks. That's why great white is still number 1. But the oceanic white tip basically is responsible for killing pretty much every passenger of the boats in World War II that fell in the water. Out of all the ones who died, it would have been the oceanic white tips that ate them. I mean, of course, some drowned, some were killed by snook, but the oceanic white tip was by far the greatest, the highest death count for any shark. And yeah, then, let's see, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Well, it says here they lost an estimated $1 million in canceled reservations at hotels. Recalling the unclaimed $500 reward Herman Ulrichs had offered for proof that a shark attack north of Cape Hatteras, Lucas concluded that this reward was never claimed, shows that there is practically no danger of shark attack from a shark about our coasts. So even after 1916, these people still didn't think that sharks were killing people. They still didn't think it was possible. There's just no danger from sharks. Sharks won't hurt you. And they can. They certainly can. Now let's see. After investigating the attacks and searching for clues to explain them, Lucas, Nichols, and Murphy confirmed that an unusual number of sharks had summered in the New York, New Jersey waters. The nearest I can come to accounting for a sudden preying of these fish, Lucas said, is to say that this is a shark year. In line with this theory, Nichols and Murphy wrote, "It is not impossible that this summer sharks really are with us in unprecedented force, and that we are experimenting an extraordinary shark migration, a movement comparable with the sporadic abundance during certain years of any worms or jellyfishes, or western grasshoppers or northern lemmings, movements that all have their source in overproduction and other little understood natural agencies." Further indication that 1916 was a shark year comes from the records of a remarkable shark watcher, Edwin Thorne, a member of the board of managers of the New York Zoological Society. Thorne's hobby was not only shark watching but also shark catching. Between the years 1911 and 1927, Thorne spent a total of 302 days looking for sharks in Long Island's Great South Bay, then and now a popular bathing and boating area. Great South Bay was also popular with sharks, Thorne discovered. For in those 17 years he sighted 1799 sharks and killed 305 of them. In 1916 he saw 277 sharks and killed 102. In no other year did he see or kill as many. And then so here's the other thing. So he wasn't even killing like great whites or anything. He was killing brown sharks. Almost all of the sharks that he killed were female brown sharks, and they were in those waters to produce babies. That was their spawning time. And he just decided all sharks are bad sharks, so we're just going to kill pretty much every brown shark in the area instead of worrying about the big ones. Because a shark's a shark. If it's a shark, it's a man killer. That's what they all thought. But now we know that's not true. Sharks are awesome creatures. And then it says, no brown shark has ever been convicted of attacking a bather. An increase in the number of brown sharks in New York waters would have had no direct connection with the New Jersey attacks. The indication, however, that more brown sharks than usual were around in 1916 did raise the question of whether a shark population explosion in indigenous sharks somehow had brought about the appearance of a dangerous stranger such as a great white shark. Besides the shark year theory, there were also some speculation that hunger had driven the sharks closer to the shore. Because of unexplained and shortages of normal food at sea, the sharks were said to be prowling the coasts, seeking new prey, and 5 times or so the theory went that had been man. This theory, of course, did not square with the assumption that a single shark had been responsible for all 5 attacks, but even though human remains had been found in one of the great white shark caught on July 14th, this was not irrefutable proof that the great white had been the only one of its kind, or the only large and potentially dangerous shark in New Jersey waters during that particular summer. On a hot August afternoon in 1960, so 3 years before this book was written, 44 summers after the New Jersey shark attacks of 1916, John Broder, a 24-year-old accountant, and Jean Filamorano, his 22-year-old fiancée, walked hand in hand into the surf off a beach in Seagirt, New Jersey, barely 2 miles from Spring Lake, where Charles Bruder had been killed by sharks so long before. In waist-deep water, John and Jean waited for a breaker that would carry them to shore. A glistening, frothing breaker bore down on them. Broder let it pass. He wanted the bigger one, of course. As the breaker rolled past him, he thought he saw something black within it. He wondered idly for a moment then for what that something was. Then something, that black something, struck him from behind and seized his right leg. Broder kicked his left leg as the thing was clamping an ever-tightening grip about his other leg. His left leg struck something hard and coarse. He twisted about and hit a black body with his left hand, so rough to the surface of what he had hit that it had badly cut 2 of his fingers. The sea around him was red, and he saw floating to the surface bits of red flesh torn from his leg. Once again, poke the shark in the eyes because their skin is way too powerful and sharp that, if you're punching it and kicking it, you're going to be bleeding. So I just stab it in the eye with your finger. Submerged by the next breaker, Broder lost consciousness. Miss Filamorano pulled him to the surface and screamed for help. 3 men dashed into the surf and helped her carry him to the beach. Norman Porter, a former Marine major, ran to where Broder was being placed on the beach, grabbed a leather belt from a lifeguard, and wrapped it around Broder's thigh as a tourniquet. The calf of his leg was hanging by a few shreds of flesh and muscle. One leg bone was crushed, the other deeply gouged. By the time he reached the hospital, only a few minutes after he was carried ashore, he had lost an estimated 8 pints of blood. 8 days after he entered the hospital, Broder's mangled right leg was amputated at the knee, but he was lucky. He had survived a shark attack. The sharks were off the New Jersey coast in the summer of 1962, just as they were every year. But when one pleasant Sunday in August, a bather stumbled bleeding out of the water on the beach in Manasquan, the resort-minded police stubbornly insisted that a big fish, not a shark, had done the job. The bather, Michael Roman, aged 24, was taken to a Point Pleasant, New Jersey hospital. The physician who stitched up Roman's left hand and thigh said that an outline of teeth forming an incomplete oval of 7.5 by 9.5 inches was clearly visible on Roman's leg. Still, the official report persisted, a big fish. Finally, on Tuesday, State Conservation Commissioner H. Matt Adams courageously faced the fact that emblazoned on Michael Roman's left thigh, what had attacked Michael Roman, the commissioner solemnly announced, was a shark, obviously. You can't mistake that bite for anything else. It was a very special kind of shark, however, for Adams pointed out it did not engage in a vicious attack. He said the shark had not closed its jaws, rather Roman had unknowingly put his arm in the shark's mouth up to his elbow. It almost seemed as if Roman was being blamed for attacking the shark. What happened to John Broder that day in 1960? What happened to Charles Van Sant, to Charles Bruder, to Lester Stilwell, to Stanley Fisher, to Joseph Dunn, and what happened down the years to so many, and yet proportionately to so few bathers, that could happen on any warm day in any year at any beach on the East Coast, West Coast, or Gulf Coast of the continental United States. It could happen too on any day or night in any warm or temperate sea on Earth, for the shark lives in them all. And there are so many rivers and at least one freshwater lake where it could happen also. Rarely does it happen. The chances of being attacked by a shark, it is often said, are about as great as being struck by lightning. Actually, there's no comparison between the rarity of death by shark bite and the frequency of death by lightning. In 1959, for instance, 183 people were killed by lightning in the United States, and only 3 were known to be killed by sharks. Australia is regarded as one of the most shark-infested countries in the world. Since 1919, there have been about 100 reported attacks on swimmers in Australia, less than 3 a year. And at one beach, even after 3 attacks took place, it was calculated that for each bather attacked by a shark, about 30 million bathers had suffered no more than a sunburn. Of the swimmers who have enjoyed Florida waters in modern times, less than 1 out of every 5 million bathers has been attacked in any way by a shark. The other thing that I hate is how they refer to it as shark-infested waters. Stuff like that. It's not shark-infested, that's where they live. It's their habitat, their home. If anything, it's human-infested. So, yeah. Let's see. On August 24th, a man in 4.5 feet of water, 75 yards offshore in Bridgeport, Connecticut, was nipped on the left arm by a shark. The panic increased. Sharks were being reported and occasionally caught off beaches in Boston and Florida. Beach after beach was closed. In New York City, policemen armed with submachine guns manned 6 police launches, which along with 2 helicopters were assigned to special shark patrol duty. On August 30th, still in 1960, a man swimming 2 miles from shore at Ocean City, New Jersey, about 40 miles south of the scene of the Broder attack, was savaged by 2 or more sharks. His right leg was severely torn and his body slashed, but he managed to swim ashore. Eventually, he recovered without losing his leg. That's pretty impressive, honestly. The panic was really on now. 25,000 bathers were ordered out of the water after a shark was reported off New York City's Orchard Beach. There were no reports of children being trampled this time. Coney Island bathers scrambled ashore when policemen, firing rifles and submachine guns for the benefit of cameramen, inadvertently triggered a shark scare. And that's what was happening back then. Shark scares were big back then. It was like 1916 with modern touches. Besides the submachine guns and the helicopters, a Navy blimp was put on shark spotting duty, and Coast Guard cutters scoured the sea, directed to reported shark packs by radio. Between August 13th and October 13th, 1961, a total of 310 sharks were caught off the New Jersey and Long Island coast by agents of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as part of a very limited study of predators of game fishes. The catch, according to Dr. Lionel A. Walford, director of Sandy Hook Marine Laboratory at Highlands, New Jersey, included 6 great white sharks ranging in weight from 151 to 285 pounds. And that is pathetic for a great white. Like, all these back, so that, I don't know, they could have been bull sharks even, but I'm assuming they would be great whites. But anyway, they can get 5,000 more pounds, so 285, 151, those are some like itsy bitsy sharks. Then it says at the bottom of the page, other species caught in the Fish and Wildlife Survey, 124 sandbars weighing 8 to 348 pounds. Okay, so the sandbar sharks are bigger than the great whites. 77 dusky sharks, 12 to 590 pounds. So that was even bigger apparently. 52 smooth dogfish, 1.5 to 18 pounds. 29 tiger sharks, 29 to 1,100 pounds. 9 hammerheads, 24 to 225 pounds. 6 makos, 220 to 320 pounds. one sand shark 250 pounds, and a 650-pound thresher. 6 sharks were lost before they could be positively identified. There was one report of a non-fatal attack in California in 1956. Then in 1957, one eerie encounter with a shark was reported. Peter Savino and Daniel Hogan were swimming beyond the breakers of Morro Bay near San Luis Obispo. Savino became tired and Hogan began towing him toward shore. A shark appeared, nudged Savino, and slashed his arm, apparently by rubbing him with its sandpaper hide. "I have blood on my arms. We better get out of here," Savino yelled to Hogan. They began swimming separately. Hogan turned a moment later to see whether Savino was alright. Savino had disappeared without an outcry and was never seen again. Kind of creepy. I don't know, it doesn't even mention there's blood in the water, so he's just gone. You know, he just doesn't exist anymore. In 1959, California again experienced a year of the shark. On May 7th, a swimmer was killed by a shark practically within the shadow of Golden Gate Bridge. And on June 14th, there almost certainly was another great white shark off La Jolla, but this time the shark was not caught. Instead, it caught a man. Robert Pamperin, a husky 33-year-old aircraft engineer, was diving for abalone about 50 yards off La Jolla with another skin diver, Tom Leher. Suddenly, Pamperin rose high out of the water. His skin diver faceplate had been torn off. He screamed once. "I was swimming about 15 feet from Bob," Leher said later. "I heard him calling, 'Help me, help me.' I swam over to him. He was thrashing in the water, and I could tell he was fighting something underneath. In the next instant, Pamperin went under. Leher peered underwater through his faceplate. The water, though bloodied, was remarkably clear, and he saw his friend's body in the jaws of a shark. It had a white belly, and I could see its jaws and jagged teeth," Leher said. "I wasn't able to do anything more, so I swam to shore to warn the other swimmers." Before 1959 ended, there were 3 more attacks in California. A spear fisherman whose left leg was slashed by a hammerhead shark 300 yards from where Pamperin had been devoured. A swimmer whose left arm was raked from wrist to elbow by a shark off Malibu. And a skin diver who lived to tell how, what he presumed to be, a great white shark bit down on one of his rubber fins, shook me like a dog shakes a bone, and then released him unharmed. At many beach resorts, shark patrols were doubled, and swimmers were continually warned against swimming alone or venturing out too far. Along the coast of Victoria and New South Wales, at least 15 grey nurse and white pointed sharks were killed. Now, the grey nurse shark is also called the sand tiger shark. At least I'm pretty sure that's what it was when I looked it up. But yeah, back then they were referred to as grey nurse. Nowadays we know them as sand tiger sharks. But in mid-December, a 22-year-old man was attacked off the Queensland coast. His right leg was mauled and he died within a week. Then on December 28th, an 18-year-old girl and her 24-year-old boyfriend went swimming at Mackay, Queensland. They were standing in about 2.5 feet of water, about 12 feet from the shore. That's very close to the shore and very shallow water, so that's surprising. When the shark knocked down the girl. In 3 savage attacks, the shark ripped off one of the girl's arms and part of the other and slashed her right thigh. Her companion desperately beat the shark with his fists. His right hand suddenly gushed blood. By this time, a third bather came to their aid and the shark disappeared. 48 hours later, the girl died. And there we go. That's all I'm going to read from this book. It's a really awesome book. It's very interesting. And so I really enjoyed it. So that is 4, technically 3 outdated books. The Shadows in the Sea book is actually pretty good information. I like that one. But the other 2 that I read in the beginning, they really need, they're really outdated. Their information is mostly false and interesting anyway. And then yeah, the I Survived book about the shark attacks in 1916, which is basically identical to what I read, just with new characters that are fictional. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.